Hello everyone. My name is Aishwarya and I will be the moderator for today's session. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we will be having a webinar today on consent mechanism in mobile applications. And for this, we have two eminent speakers with us. Ms. Ayushi Singh, she is the head of legal at Virohan, and we have Himanshu Gautam with us. He is the CEO and founder of GoTrust. So I would really like to know from you, Ayushi, if you just give a brief introduction about yourself. Over to you, Ayushi.
Sure. Thanks, Aishwarya, and thanks to the entire GoTrust team to have me here. I am Ayushi Singh. I am the head of legal and privacy at Veroman. I am also a privacy consultant for PayU Group, which includes PayU Payments, PayU Finance, which is their NBFC arm, PayU Innovations, which is the data provider. There are two LSPs, PaySense and LazyPay, and there are and Wibmo, which is a processor. So I lead the privacy at PayU Group, and I'm the head of legal and privacy at Verohan, which is a startup dealing with edtech and healthcare sector. My previous experience in data has been for the past 4 5 years. I have been very actively involved with the ministry in the drafting of the rules and in consultation with the ministry as per for recommendations on revisions in the act. I am also actively involved in recommendations on the AI Act that is going to come up in the ministry and which is currently in a consultation phase. So that's the brief about me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ayushi. Thank you for this descriptive introduction. Now, over to you, Himanshu.
Thank you, Ashwarya. Thank you, Ashi, for the introduction. Okay, guys, sorry, I'm a bit sick, so voice is a bit low, but yeah, normally I'm more louder than this. So, Himanshu, I'm founder and CEO of GoTrust, trying to solve the privacy puzzle across the globe. Today's focus is India, DPDPA, and hope we can add some value. And we have eminent guest Ayushi here, so let's hope we bring some valuable information back to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Himanshu, and thank you so much, Ayushi, for taking out time and joining this webinar with us. So, before delving deeper into mobile consent application, Ayushi, let us talk about what consent is. Like how the DPDPA and how GDPR defines consent.
Sure. I'll start with the historical background of GDPR and then give you a reference of what things have been adopted from there in the DPDP Act, as well as the proposed rules that have come out in January, of which recommendations are due on February 18th. So, when it comes to the concept of consent, it was not new under the GDPR. There's a 1991 convention of the EU that recognized the need of having informed, clear, specific consent of data principles, which was far even beyond when the mobile and the internet technology had hit. And throughout various recommendations, we have seen that there are domestic adoption of the convention across EU nations. So there were concepts of data subject rights. There was concept of rectification, erasure, data management life cycle, concept of consent, which is already there and for the previous like 20 25 years, and then GDPR got adopted. However, in India, other than for certain regulated sectors like NBFC, lending institutions, or insurance sector and healthcare, there was hardly any concept of consent. Under all of these regulated regimes, there was a concept of consent. There still is. There is under the NBFC sector, there are digital lending guidelines which tell you that how consent has to be taken from a borrower during a lending journey. So that there, the regulation, the sectoral regulations were ahead of the ministry. They have come up with a requirement of specific informed consent. Now, after the IT Act, which is extremely silent on explicit consent, we've seen the DPDP Act coming up with the concept of consent in domestic legislation, and the rules kind of further enhancing what is consent. Now, coming to the concept of what is consent under the DPDP Act. So, if you read Rule 4, 5, and 6, basically Rule 5 and 6, they'll tell you that a consent has to be accompanied and preceded by a notice. So one mode of consent and the process of taking it is that you have a notice. Secondly, what would constitute consent is provided under Section 6, which says that it should be clear, specific, informed, unambiguous, and done by an affirmative action, which essentially means that you can no longer have it in your T&Cs and privacy policy stating that I give the right of marketing over my data. They can do anything under the sun. And it has to be for a specific time frame, which is not entirely coming from the requirement of Section 5. But if you read the rules, as well as there is a schedule, I think Schedule 2 or 3, which provides for three major institutions what is the attention law, and in the absence of which the consent would also be for a particular time frame. So, for example, if Ayushi has given a consent that I am okay with receiving marketing campaign to a particular industry or a player, that consent, the retention also is read in Section 5. So the section is not to be read in isolation. It is to be read in entirety of the act. And the objective is to ensure that at every point of collection of a personal data of an individual, all of these parameters are met. And further, the notice requirement is provided under the DPDP rules, which we can take up during the course of this conversation.
Okay.
Aishwarya, we can't hear you. Sorry. Or maybe I can't hear you.
Yes, sorry, I was on mute. So, since we are talking about retention and revocation of consent, like, are there any legal obligations that are mentioned in the statutes that you have to, what are the ways of revoking the consent by the end user? Are there any
So there
obligations that are mentioned? Yes.
Sure. So the obligations under the consent, when you provide a notice, you have to you have to tell them how can they revoke the consent. Also on the website, generally the companies would have opt-in. The law is very specific, has reiterated in the rules that withdrawal of consent is is supposed to be as easy as giving the consent. So you can't bury it under layers and layers of going to this channel or reaching out via email and then getting redirected and then waiting for it in the line. It has to be as much easier as it was during giving of consent. We will have, definitely companies will have to go to the whiteboard and figure out how it's going to be done. B2C, it's still easier. B2C industries will have an issue with revocation of consent. We will see as the industry evolves around it. There are also global practices when it comes to withdrawal of consent. For example, under California data protection law, there is something called as a global privacy consent, which means that every website which is active, Ayushi through her phone, through a web extension, can say that revoke my consent across all platforms. And it's something that is recognized under law and it's been upheld in California, it's there in Connecticut. We have seen even in EU, there are 4 or 5 modes of collection of consent, like a scan code is also taken as a valid notice for a consent. So something of that sort may also work. The industry will evolve. Links would be there. There would be written text. There would be sort of a technical solution to it. There could be barcodes around it. The law does not prescribe that it has to be in black and white written form through a notice on the interface, and especially it's relevant when you come to mobile consent because your user interface is this much, right? And then you have to meet the requirements of the act, the grievance redressal, the option of opt-out, an itemized list of goods and services, the data that you are collecting. So we'll have to see how it can be made easier, more transparent, and fulfilling the requirements of the law. So that is the entire understanding that we have currently under the proposed rules and the act when it comes to revocation of consent.
Yes, actually. So the thing is that if the end user is giving the consent, so the end user should have the right to revoke the consent as well, and that should be very, in a granular form, and that should be very feasible to the end user. So, proceeding further with that particular statement, Himanshu, just I would like to know from your side that what are your inputs on that, that how organizations should be dealing with such kind of scenarios when it comes to, especially when it comes to mobile applications. How should they be able to manage the consent?
So consent management, I think from an organizational perspective and what we are doing or what I've seen across industries, that they're doing it in three phases, right? One is at the source of collection of consent. They know the entire life cycle of data. So you would know what is your source of collection. There would be a classification. Then there would be internal management tools helping you with identification, even if you're putting it in some algorithmic software, so that at any points of revocation, if suppose tomorrow a data principal sort of revokes it, it can be identified. Of course, you may want to retain it for legal purposes. Some industries are supposed to, for example, banking industry. So there's KYC master direction, which are kind of mandates you to retain it. But then further processing needs to be stopped on the data, other than for the requirement of the law when this consent is being revoked. So the entire life cycle has to be there. When the consent is revoked, and an individual or a data principal goes to revocation of consent, there should be an automatic opt out of all unnecessary purposes other than for record retention for the requirement of law. And that's how you will manage like the entire life cycle. So your life cycle will consist of collection, classification, processing, retention, and one aspect within processing would be transferred to third parties, and how you will ask other data fiduciaries or your data processors to stop processing around it.
So actually, on the third one, last point you mentioned about third-party vendor, third-party risk, specifically when the consent we pass on the data to third parties, how are we going to control it? Because in today's world, we know if, as a first party, we know we have data, we can control it. Once we have revoked the consent, we're going to delete it or modify, archive, whatever is needed. We're going to perform that kind of data. How will control the third parties? For example, I'm a bank and I've given the data to a third party for credit score or for let's say a terrorist check or bad some kind of list. Some check has to be done. How as a company I can ensure that the third parties have also deleted the data whom I have used as my vendor or sub vendor in the process.
Sure. Himanshu, actually, that's a very good question. Third party data management specifically stems from the fact of point number one, that you would check if there's a checklist. Your point number one should be what is the capacity in which the third party is taking it. If they're taking it in the capacity of an independent data fiduciary, then you have limited or no right of revocation. The revocation has to be direct in nature unless they don't have a B2C interface. That is one aspect. Surprisingly, in comparison to GDPR, for Indian data processors, the IT Act as well as the DPDP Act did not put any obligations of data principle. So even if there is a violation by a data processor, then the violation would be of the data fiduciary as no, and not there's no liability directly or no regulatory requirement directly on the data processor, in which case which might be your third parties who are doing risk check, analytics, KYC, fraud checks, everything that you mentioned. For that, there are three parameters that can be done. From a legal and compliance perspective, what you need to do is to tell them that if I've given the data for a particular use case, you delete it after that use case. So, for example, if Ayushi or Himanshu's data is flown to Kaza Technologies, which does KYC, or to Visa DM that does risk checks, then after they've given me the score, there should be a data purging. The data matching also, if it could be done in a sandbox environment, should be ideally done in a sandbox environment. But in most cases, sometimes the servers are in India, or sometimes the servers cannot be created in a sandbox environment due to cost involved. So if you're taking your data outside your system, which is beyond your control, you ensure that you have a purging obligation of them. They purge it as soon as it's done, because
Yeah.
processes are not obligated to retain data for compliance with applicable law. The requirement is always on the data fiduciary. So
Agreed,
that
agreed, agreed.
purging work
No,
ideally should
so
work.
point. So that point is very clear. Now, when you talk about the purging of data, challenge is coming is from the control point of view. Because as a technology partner, we have the tool, the means. So if I am using a third party vendor where there are APIs, so I can control end to end consent from my own mobile app or from my mobile SDK, because I have a first party consent, and I know precisely for which vendor or sub vendor we have mapped each PII. That means what data I'm passing on to which vendor for what purpose. So I can precisely go and ask the vendor to delete it if there is an API connection available. Because today I have given the data, tomorrow I can send a purge request itself. What happens for the vendors where there is no such features are available? You're saying I'm not liable. That's one part of it as a company. But what
You will
about?
definitely be liable. There's no roundabout around it. At no points of time does the act or the rules prescribe obligations of data principal. So where you don't have control, you can have contractual rights such as audit rights, where you go annually or and ask for it. You can ask for a purging certificate at each purging activity, and if it's a continuous activity, suppose you hit them with APIs or bulk batches every week or
Mhm.
any other form of exchange by email. You can ask them for a compliance certificate of purging. Also, retain a right of audit. So your InfoSec team would go to their softwares and delete it. There may be other technical controls. Probably somebody would with IT who can tell you about these can. But there's one more innovative way that we have seen the industry evolve. When you're giving the data, you could do like a pet on it. So pet would be like a privacy enhancement technique. So while you're giving data, it's still anonymized or perturbated, or you're giving a dummy data or a token over the data. So they don't have personal data to begin with. For you, it would still be personal. For them, it's a pet data. So once they're done with their analysis, with unhashing and doing everything, they would still not make sense of ideally related to whether the data was of Ayushi Singh or Himanshu. The token would be like 1, 2, 3, 4 for them and 1, 2, 3, 4 for you. So while you get your work done, they do not have access. So if you could restrict it via PET, nothing like it. If you still can't do it via PET, then you have all of these audit and contractual protections around it.
Pet solutions I have seen a lot. We tried also implement a lot. The challenge with pet is it's not applicable in all the cases, because if I have to pass on my name, DOB, and my other financial details for my credit score, I have to give actual data to the vendor so that I can get a credit score of it. I cannot pet it. So the problem, it comes in multiple challenges, and that's why I was asking that question. If you have seen something else,
Yeah,
please
Himanshu,
enlighten us.
but your lender would always be a data fiduciary. And if you are giving the data fiduciary data to a lender, you're doing it, you can only do it in two capacities. One as a referral partner and second as a lead service provider. Lead service providers are guided. So anyways, you are not liable because you are a processor then if you're forwarding it for borrowing purposes. They are the data fiduciary. You are only a data processor for them, even if the data set is originating on your leads or your screens. In both cases, then you will not have the liability under law. It is their liability. Your liability is anyways restricted. Your rights as a data partner is restricted to keeping minimal data. The digital lending guidelines in I think section 10 and 11 go on and on about the fact that even with consent you can't take additional data. So when you don't have the right to collect additional data, retain additional data, deletion is not even a problem for LSPs, especially in the lending sector. What you've said makes complete sense in other sectors. Probably in banking industry or finance, this may not be a challenge for the lead provider because they are not in the capacity of a data fiduciary, they are in the capacity of a data processor.
And we have also seen a lot of times that there are a lot of vendors going around on the street collecting data, collecting your phone numbers and email ID. Okay, you can take this card for just give the data for
Offline collection that you are
offline
saying,
collection.
or yes.
Offline. See, it's very ambiguous. They will take data from you and put it in the system immediately. So they convert, they talk to you, and they put it in the system and in the evening someday. So how that is kind of going to be controlled, or how that's going to be looked at, because there's no consent behind it. So we were thinking about talking. Okay, they give a QR code. If people should scan it, and OTP should come. And with OTP verification happen, then it's legitimate data which is coming in. So we had a lot of discussion on that also. But it's again very ambiguous, and India
If the
being
industry
so.
will evolve, It's an absolute practice. India is the largest population of people, right? So the data mine is immense, and we have used this left, right, center. PayU itself is doing a lot when it comes to data, and I've been there for the past 5 years. It's surprising to see how these giants are using data for analytics, insight, behavioral profiling, sometimes for marketing purposes or for statutory purposes, right? So, industry will evolve. There is no straitjacket solution. People have to kind of get aligned with the fact that data that is usually available free of cost may not be there post the DPDP rules come out, because there would be lack of consent. The grandfathering kind of ensures that historical data is there under 5.2, but new collection of data, new consent, we're talking like 3 4 years down the line, the grandfather data or the historical data will become state, and then we will see how the world evolves around taking consent.
Thank you. Aishwarya, back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a very intensive discussion on consent. Himanshu, as you have seen a lot of organization managing consent through mobile applications, would you like to share some insights of what would be the best practices when it comes to collecting the consent through mobile applications?
What we have done to give this facility to the not only the consumer but also to uh, these companies is twofold. Number one, there's a possibility to collect consent using web forms, so URLs, APIs. Form can be anywhere basically, mobile forms or web portal forms. Now, once you have a consent, the next question is how, what kind of uh, views are available for end customer so that they can modify, change, or revoke their consent or give new consents basically. So we have developed a preference center, and this preference center is always available after the authentication of the end consumer. That means preference center is engraved into the application of uh, either the mobile application or whether it is the web application is always engraved in it. So you, as your customer, will always see the preference center as its own feature set that he has given all the consent till date is listed there, and he has a toggle button where he can switch between granting the access or revoking the access or granting the access or specific purposes which has been already defined. So that's one way to do it. Other way around is we also have created a preference center which is publicly available. If some companies have a challenge, they cannot immediately built in the preference center which is available. They can also consume it with the web forms. Only thing is in web form based preference center has to be sent to the consumer by email or by other means like WhatsApp. So both are possible. There's mobile SDK based or web form based. Both options are available. That's what we have seen. Big banks, big companies which are having not big consumer base, they prefer to go via preference center way, which is engraved in the application because it becomes a nightmare for them to manage all the requests which will come in via emails. And then irony is half of the industry I talk to, they still mention that DSR is under consent because with but if you think as a layman point of view, there will be a request to do something and therefore consent has to be revoked. But the whole idea is why DSR comes into play. Basically, if you see, if I have a consent or I don't have a consent, nobody will know until unless they're aware of it. Once they know they're aware, they have certain rights. They can execute the rights. So first thing which is triggered is DSR. Like, okay, I as a Himanshu sending an email to a company saying, help me with all my data you have. And then all the nitty gritty starts behind the scene. Okay, company has to find out, do they have data of Himanshu or not? Yes. Then do they have the consent to have that data or not? Because that's another level of challenge. Because if I have and I tell Himanshu I have a data without having a consent, I don't know what kind of legal challenges that's going to create. So this is like a puzzle which is coming up in a lot of discussions, and maybe actually you can add certain information on that part, how to solve that. But yeah, at least from our side, for the mobile, I explained that we have this all of this supplied basically.
I think an SDK solution would be a good lifesaver, especially for B2C sort of industries, which are manifold, right? From e-commerce, social media, gaming institution, banking networks, NBFCs, anything that has a D2C or a B2C sort of a relationship. And SDK to manage consent is something which is very prevalent and as a business that we've seen growing in across the world. Finer challenges would be there. Himanshu, you rightly pointed out the challenges. I don't think I have anything further to add. There are a couple of others, but they're not they're all minor in nature. You've pointed out the major ones, so I don't want to repeat that again. We will see how the consent storage would happen. Audit trail of consents and data subject rights would evolve around it. A third party solution will be a big saver for data fiduciaries in embedded in the mobile consent itself.
True, I totally agree. Totally agree. I think one more thing is coming up is the other solution which you mentioned about the tokenization. So if you can combine the tokenization solution with the consent and with the third party, so that also is a very nice way to look at how the minimization of the data will happen with the
Happen
tokenization, and
exactly.
then the impact of.
Another,
Go
please,
ahead, you
please
got
go
it.
ahead.
No, no, please.
I said another important aspect that I could be that could be added to the managing of mobile consent would be a very age verification software. It can be an add-on service here. A lot of companies, specifically social media and online e-commerce and gaming, would absolutely want it as an additional service if it can be embedded that you ping an institution such as Aadhaar and take like a thumbs up or thumbs down whether the consent, whether to ensure that section 9, the requirement that you're not processing data of a child, and how do you take verifiable consent. That could also be a very valid add on to your entire mobile consent. I've been talking to another player just yesterday who was kind of thinking about it, just some food for thought here. But the whole data lifecycle management, specifically excluding section 9, which is minor, gets adequately captured when you're doing that lifecycle management that you just showed.
So we already have dual consent process, dual approval consent. So then we can take it to the minor. Only thing today which we are trying to achieve is we have dual authentication, but we are now trying to connect with government uh, service
Yes.
like Aadhaar or something else.
Aadhaar, or
So
there's something new which has come for the kids. I'm forgetting the
it's
name, but some sort of a similar on
correct.
lines of Aadhaar, which
Similar.
kind of connects a family. Yes.
So today we have dual authentication that okay, in case you're a minor, I can route it towards your father and you can give a consent on SMS or email. But again, that can be faked because the guy who's filling the form can give a wrong email ID of his friend. There's a lot of ways you can go around
A
it.
lot of ways,
So
but that is we specifically brought out this point, right? For specifically for India, statistically, 20% of mobile devices are shared. So probably if Ayushi is a child of 9, 10 years, she will not have it. She's using the mobile of a mother or her father. So in those cases, how do you take verifiable consent? And the ministry did not say a lot about it. They just said that an opt-in coupled with maybe an authentication that you are talking about should be good enough. There may not even be a requirement. It's just that it should be an opt-in. There was also a solution where they're taking date of birth without telling that we will see if you're above 18, but that goes against the concept of data minimization. So again, industry is evolving, trying out various things, seeing what is suited to their requirement, and then gradually progressing towards having like a consent management that I see you've tried to build and quite adequately captured most of it.
thank you for that. So that's what we try to build, and we try to connect it with all different angles. Thank you, Ashley, for adding all the knowledge,
Sure,
nitty-gritties
I'm
of it.
happy to be here. We're very grateful for this opportunity. It was lovely interacting with all of you.
Thank you, Ashwarya. Thank you for moderating it. It
Thanks.
was good.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Ayushi. Thank you, Himanshu. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
All right, ciao, ciao.